Thank you so much for staying with us. We talk about dreams, difficulties, and destiny through the life of Joseph. Now, I'm going to get into this topic, and it's so important because I have never heard a sermon about this one principle that was constantly in Joseph's life that I've never heard a pastor actually highlight. And that was Joseph was always under authority. Joseph was never the authority, the total authority in his own life. He was always the younger brother. He was never the top dog. He was awesome at being mentored. He was awesome at letting other people be an authority over him to give him wisdom. Now that takes a humble heart. So I'm going to go through Joseph's development. Now remember, I'm a psychologist, and sometimes I look at the Bible differently. And so I look at how did this person develop into this person? Like me and Joni right now, we're going through another one of the prophets. And as we go through the prophets, one of the things I share with her is look at how God developed him here. Look at what he had him do here and developed him in this way. And I look at the development of the people of the scripture because I know them as people. And when you look at the things that God puts people through, it gives you a lot of insight into who they become. So I want to walk through just kind of briefly the development of Joseph as a person, as a man, as a teenager becoming really the second in command of the largest nation in the world. It'd be like doing a story on someone who becomes the vice president of the United States or the vice president of any nation. And so the first thing we see Joseph in his family. Now in his family, Joseph was not the firstborn of the family at all, okay? Now he was the firstborn of Rachel, who was very loved by Israel, Jacob, his father. But then looking at Jacob's situation, okay? And you can look at Genesis 37, 3-4 to just kind of look at that. But we look at Israel, and he had a ranch. Joseph comes from an agricultural community where his dad was one of the top guys, okay? Huge ranch. Now, I live in Texas now, and so I see huge ranches, and here's what goes on. There's a lot of employees, okay? Now, the great thing about, this situation is there were 12 sons. So you already had your employee base right there, and then they all had servants, and so there's, 30, 60, maybe 100 people working the ranch, running the cows, running the sheep, running the goats, feeding this, getting this, building the troughs, digging a well, getting things done, fixing things. So what we have here is a small, not really that small, but a family business. Now, having businesses, my children grew up in the business. You learn about the business. You find how your gifts apply in the business. Now, unfortunately for his brothers, none of them were given this incredible supernatural administrative gift, and Joseph was. You see that as one of the manifestations of who he is. He just administers things, okay? He sees things, he sees systems, how things can be improved, how they can be better, how we can manage, how we can save, how we can use our resources. It just was a gift for him. And it didn't go so well with his brothers, you know that. They were jealous of this gift, and what happened to him? They threw him into the pit. Okay, we all know the story. I'm not going to preach about the pit. You all know the story about the caravan came by and they took him to Joseph's next destination. Now, sometimes people get in sour situations and they don't see the handiwork of God. They don't see the tapestry of what God's doing. See, God wasn't demoting Joseph. He was promoting Joseph. You're like, well, Doug, how does Joseph get promoted by getting thrown into a pit? Well, where did he show up? In Potiphar's house. Now, Potiphar, he was a general. And you can look at Genesis 39, 2-6, if you want to look at that scripture. But Potiphar's organization was way bigger than Dad's organization. There were a lot more slaves. He was a general in the army of Egypt. This guy had power. He had influence. He had access to the Pharaoh. He walked back and forth having conversations with the Pharaoh on battles and strategies and preparations. And here's Joseph managing the house. And because of his gift, and because he was able to sit under, God continued to develop him. And so what we see is that Joseph sat under Potiphar's wisdom, how to run an army, how to get things done, how to store stuff in his own house, how to manage the equipment that was being there, how to manage the other slaves that were in the house. That was way bigger operation than his dad's, but similar in that you had to feed people, get things done, you had to use resources, but it was much nicer than his dad's house, I'm sure. So Joseph, again, was under another mentor situation, all right? Then what happens? Joseph develops and gets promoted again. Now, Joseph's promotions look really bad up front, okay? I'll be honest. Being falsely accused, okay, having a lawsuit or having something, out there on the internet, people lying about you, because if you're have any level of platform, you will be lied about. Jesus told us about that. Now, there's people who lie about me or other people who are in ministry all the time. I was sitting with a very famous pastor just recently, and he said, I wish I owned the Lamborghinis that they told me that I own. I wish I owned the house that they showed a picture of. So he gets lied about and he ends up in prison. Now, prison doesn't seem like a promotion because it's not as lofty as the house he just came from. But here's what's different. The prison was bigger. There were thousands of people probably to feed. There were thousands of things moving in systems. There were thousands of things going on. And somehow the prison warden noticed Joseph's gift of administration to the point where he trusted a prisoner with the entire prison. But here's what Joseph learned. He learned to sit under the feet of a man who was running a corporation, a big corporation, the prisons of Egypt. And he learned how to think about managing all these resources and how do we put the food over here to feed these over here and how we got to think ahead and how we got to purchase ahead and all that kind of stuff. And where do you think some of the ideas came for Joseph to be able to present to the king? But from the mentor of the prison, where he sat day in, day out, managing resources, ordering products, getting stuff done, making sure things were cleaned up and all this kind of stuff. And he learned how to manage several layers of systems that were bigger and more complicated than they were in Potiphar's house. And then we all know the great story of him in the prison and how God lifted him up to Pharaoh's house. Okay, and that's Genesis 41, 39 through 41. And how Joseph became now mentored by the greatest leader in the world at that time. So what we find out is Joseph was mentored now by Pharaoh. And to really learn how to run a nation, he sat under the feet of a great leader who was trained by great leaders and had the greatest wisdom all around him in the world. And Joseph was able to continue to rise in his administrative gift. But he rose under, not over. And so many people want to lead instead of serve. Joseph's formula for success was serve with excellence. Okay, we're going to talk more about that in the next segment. But this is so important to understand that Joseph was mentored, one, by his dad, two, okay, by Potiphar's house, and number three, in the prison by the warden, and number four, by the greatest man on the earth at the time in leadership styles, and that was Pharaoh. So stay with us as we continue to walk this principle out.